I got fined $75.00 for a noise complaint. I work with headphones. That's how it started. One letter from a woman I'd never met, running an HOA I'd never joined, telling me my unauthorized activity was disturbing the peace. I live on 40 acres. But maybe she underestimated the one person in town who records everything. What followed wasn't just petty fines or power plays. It spiraled into a fight over boundaries, both legal and personal, that would tear open secrets no one saw coming. Drop a comment and tell us where you're tuning in from, lake, lawn, or HOA battle zone. If stories with twists, poetic justice, and a healthy dose of clipboard drama are your thing, hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow's story, let's just say it makes this one look like a warm-up. And trust me, you're going to want front row seats for what's coming next. My nearest neighbor is a half-mile of forest and bad decisions away, but somehow, Marilyn Drake, the self-appointed queen of Pine Hollow Shores, decided I was her next project. Or target. Or both. The letter came on a Tuesday. It was printed on thick paper, the kind that screams, "I mean business" in Times New Roman. Immediate action required, it said. Then came the list. Excessive noise, unapproved commercial use, threat to property values. You'd think I was running a nightclub in the middle of a preschool. I produce music, alone, with headphones. My vibe is lo-fi rain sounds, not Coachella. Still, she signed off with a flourish, like she'd just declared eminent domain on my peace of mind. So I called her. Because sometimes, when something feels this stupid, you assume it's a mistake. You hope someone typed the wrong name, maybe a mix-up with another house. But no, she picked up on the first ring. "Pine Hollow Shores HOA, this is Marilyn," she said, like she was auditioning for a role in a sitcom called Desperate in Cardigans. I told her who I was, told her my land wasn't part of her HOA, had never been, and was deeded back before her development even existed. She didn't argue. She pivoted. "We all live here together, Mr. Telford, and no one lives as an island. Funny, because I live on a literal peninsula. That's like telling a cactus it's not dry." She went on about community standards and harmony, and how my artistic endeavors didn't align with the family-friendly vision of Pine Hollow Shores. Vision? I didn't know I was interfering with her suburban screensaver. I offered to meet face-to-face. She laughed like I'd just offered to sell her Bitcoin out of a van. "Let's not make this more difficult than it needs to be," she said, in that tone that sounds friendly if you've never met a threat before. Now, I'm not new to conflict. I'd been through a lawsuit before, bad contract, worse attorney, 10 months of legal quicksand. I came to the woods to heal. Trees don't serve subpoenas, birds don't call zoning, and up until that letter, life was quiet, literally and emotionally. But Marilyn? Marilyn brought the HOA thunder, and not the natural kind. Her letter was more than an accusation, it was a power move. Signal. She wasn't trying to fix a problem, she was trying to mark her territory, and I was the tall grass on her neatly mowed lawn. But here's where things took a turn. I'm not just a sound producer, I'm a backup obsessive. Call it paranoia, call it trauma, but every phone call, every weird hum from the fridge, every conversation longer than a sneeze, I record it. Automatically. Part habit, part necessity. Marilyn didn't know it yet, but her HOA performance had just entered the live recording phase. 3 days later, she escalated. Bigger envelope, bigger threats, a $750.00 bill for non-compliance. Legal jargon stacked like a Las Vegas buffet, commercial misuse, residential disruption, community depreciation. The cherry on top? A letter from her lawyer, Vincent Frawley. You ever read something so pompous it makes your coffee taste like regret? That was Vincent's letter. He wrote like a man who'd studied Latin, just to confuse his enemies. Clauses upon clauses, threats buried in footnotes, and the same hollow warning, pay up or else. I didn't flinch. I didn't panic. I scanned, I archived, I added it to the folder titled, "Don't Start None, Won't Be None." That night, I sat out on the deck. The lake was still enough to feel biblical. The trees didn't sway, they listened. I watched the moon drift like it had nothing to prove. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just one of those weird neighbor disputes. This was a control mission in khakis. Marilyn wanted to turn this lake into her own gated brochure, and I was the unfiltered line on her property spreadsheet. But she didn't know what kind of problem she'd picked. I don't slam doors, I don't yell, I don't even raise my voice. I just hit record and let the story tell itself. If she wanted a sound war, she'd just declared one on a man who makes a living capturing silence and turning it into evidence. The fine was $750, 0 cents. A hard number, no fluff. No friendly reminder or kindly remit, just bold type and a cold slap of language that felt like it had been printed with clenched teeth. 3 counts: unauthorized use of residential property, non-compliance with community standards, and this one was rich, contributing to depreciated neighborhood aesthetics. Apparently my cabin offended Marilyn's vision board. And stapled to that paper punch in the gut was a letter from a man named Vincent Frawley, Esquire, the HOA's personal legal bulldog who seemed to moonlight as a thesaurus strangler. His letter read like a Shakespearean villain trying to pass the bar exam. 4 pages of threats wrapped in polite hostility. Failure to comply may result in further legal action, including but not limited to liens, civil judgment, and recovery of damages. The letter smelled like copy-paste panic. But I'd seen this play before. They wanted fear. They were getting tape. That afternoon, the phone rang again. Marilyn. No, how are you? No, just checking in. She went straight for the neck. Mr. Telford, she said, voice tight, crisp, and dipped in something too sugary to trust. I assume you've reviewed our documentation. This is a serious matter. I told her yes, I'd read the letter. I also told her she had no authority over my land, my studio, or my headphones. And then she said something that confirmed everything I'd started to suspect. Grant, no one lives in isolation here. We're a community. Sometimes adjustments have to be made for the greater good. Adjustments. Like I was a wobbly table leg. I asked if that was a threat. She laughed, a tight, nervous sound that didn't quite make it out of her throat. Not at all. Just a reminder that there are many avenues for encouraging cooperation. I'd heard that kind of threat before. Corporate. Clean. Wrapped in a ribbon that reads, respectfully. But what she didn't realize was I'd stopped cooperating the moment her first envelope hit my mailbox. The next morning, I walked the long gravel stretch to the lake dock, hoping nature could reset the sound in my brain. That's where I ran into Ellen Brooks. She was sitting on a weathered bench, sipping coffee like it was the only thing keeping her from screaming. She looked over, nodded. You must be the guy Marilyn's targeting this month. I blinked. That obvious? It's always obvious, she said. You get that look, the one where you realize this place isn't a neighborhood, it's a gated fantasy camp run by a control freak with a clipboard. Ellen had stories. Dozens. The worst? Her 10-year-old daughter had drawn a sidewalk chalk mural, a rainbow, a cat, and the word hope. 3 days later, they got a violation notice. $50 fine for vandalism. Marilyn had written that the visual clutter disrupted uniform harmony. You know what else disrupted uniformity? Having a soul. Ellen fought it at first, wrote letters, appealed. Then she gave up. You can't win when the person writing the rules is also the referee, she said. I nodded. But I wasn't ready to quit. Not this time. As we talked, more stories came out. The couple down the hill fined for growing tomatoes too close to the walkway. The veteran across the cove flagged for flying a banner inconsistent with neighborhood scale. A retired teacher cited for using a wooden bench instead of the approved metal style. Marilyn didn't enforce rules. She weaponized them. She was building her perfect neighborhood like it was a Pinterest board with a power complex. Her version of community looked more like Stepford, but with better landscaping and worse intentions. I started to see the pattern. She didn't go after everyone, just the ones who stood out. Freelancers, artists, veterans, families that couldn't or wouldn't play by her unspoken visual code. Marilyn was curating a catalog neighborhood where everything looked perfect, but only if you didn't know the price people paid to stay. I asked Ellen if anyone had tried to fight back. She shook her head. Some have tried. Most just leave. She breaks them down until moving feels like mercy. That evening, I sat in the studio, staring at waveforms on my screen, trying to work, but my brain kept returning to Ellen's chalk story, the image of a child drawing hope and being fined for it. It hit me harder than I expected. That's when I decided to check my security system. Not paranoia, just instinct, and sure enough, something was off. Footage was missing, not blank. Missing. Gaps in the timeline. Days that had previously been clean were now glitched and corrupted. I checked the logs. Someone had accessed the system remotely. Not a hack. This wasn't sophisticated. More like someone with local access had logged in, poked around, and deleted specific clips. The timestamps lined up with the day Marilyn and her lawyer had come by uninvited. I still had the audio. My redundancy habits paid off, but the main camera feed was gone. Convenient. Too convenient. I flipped to my offline backups. Thank God I never trusted cloud storage. And found everything. Marilyn standing near my no trespassing sign, whispering into her phone, pointing toward my studio like she was marking a future demolition site. Her lawyer beside her, scribbling in a notebook like he thought intimidation looked better when it was handwritten. That was the moment it became real. Not HOA drama, not a nosy neighbor, but a coordinated campaign, one with paperwork, strategy, and a target. Me. And I wasn't just annoyed. I was awake. Marilyn wanted obedience. She wanted silence, but she'd picked the wrong guy. I don't do silence. I engineer it, shape it, study it, and when needed, I break it wide open. I don't know what Marilyn and Vincent had planned next, but whatever it was, they just earned themselves a front-row seat to my kind of feedback loop, and this time, the recording was already rolling. I caught them measuring my studio like it was a crime scene, and I wasn't invited. It was a Tuesday morning, sharp sun, no wind, the kind of day that dares people to try something bold and stupid. I looked out my window and saw Marilyn Drake standing just beyond my fence line in a blazer that screamed court-ready casual. Beside her was Vincent Frawley, her rental lawyer, with a clipboard, a bad haircut, and a tape measure stretched like he was preparing to build a case. Or a call. They weren't just looking, they were photographing, whispering, pointing, trespassing with the confidence of people who believe their lies are law. What they didn't know? My cameras were already rolling, and I don't just mean the front door cam. I'm talking full perimeter, high-res, time-stamped, and synced to both local and offline storage. They weren't inspecting, they were fishing for violations in a lake that wasn't even theirs. And they brought a net made of lies. I walked out, stopped short of the property line, and asked, "Need directions, or are you two just casing cabins today?" Marilyn smiled the way snakes probably smile in political cartoons. Vincent cleared his throat like a man about to misquote a statute. Under Michigan Code 2967, homeowners associations have the right to inspect for compliance when there's probable cause. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because they were so confident and so wrong. That applies to properties under your jurisdiction, I said, which mine isn't. You'd need a court order, not a clipboard, to step where you're standing. Marilyn's smile faltered. Vincent scribbled something on his pad like he was writing a screenplay called Desperate Measures. I made a point of holding my phone high, showing the red light of the recording app, blinking like a warning beacon. "Smile for the deposition," I said. And just like that, they left, trying to look official, but walking faster than they meant to. Still, something about Marilyn's eyes stuck with me. A flicker of confidence, like she wasn't bluffing, like she already thought she'd won. And that meant she had something in her pocket I hadn't seen yet. 2 days later, it came in the form of an envelope so formal it practically had a necktie. Inside was a document from the county assessor's office, an annexation request. Someone had filed paperwork asking that my parcel be formally incorporated into the Pine Hollow Shores HOA. It even had my name on it, my signature, dated 3 weeks ago. The problem? I didn't sign it. I hadn't touched a pen for any HOA anything, and certainly not to hand over legal authority to a woman who thinks sidewalk chalk is domestic terrorism. The signature looked like mine, close enough to fool someone squinting, but I knew it wasn't real. The paper was aged artificially. The form was processed through channels too fast, too smoothly. I'd worked with contracts before. I knew how signatures flowed. This one was a performance, a forgery, and that changed everything. Suddenly, this wasn't just about bogus fines or passive-aggressive letters. This was criminal, and if I could prove it, the whole game shifted in my direction. Then came the environmental complaint. The Department of Environmental Quality left a voicemail. Friendly tone, but firm message. We've received an anonymous report of potential wetland interference and unauthorized commercial activity on your property. We'd like to schedule an inspection. I stood there in my kitchen holding the phone like it had just accused me of arson. Wetland interference? The only pollution I'm guilty of is playing Miles Davis too loud through headphones. And if making ambient soundscapes about moss counts as commercial activity, then someone's about to fine a frog. But I called them back, polite, professional, and ready. I explained everything, sent over maps, logs, photos of the untouched shoreline. Within 10 minutes, they were apologizing. Looks like we were misinformed, they said. Yeah, misinformed by a blonde with a grudge and a printer. This was no longer neighborly friction. It was legal siege. They weren't just hoping I'd fold. They were building a paper trail made of threats, lies, and bureaucratic smoke. That night, I stopped sleeping. Not because I was scared, but because I was activated. I pulled everything I had, letters, voicemails, camera footage, metadata logs, and started organizing. Time-stamped, backed up, cross-referenced, audio of every call, screenshots of every notice. I created a war folder, color-coded, labeled by source. HOA letters, legal threats, government contacts, forgeries. I built redundancy on top of redundancy, uploaded one version to encrypted cloud storage, printed hard copies and stored them off-site. The studio that once birthed film scores was now the nerve center of a counterattack. Marilyn and Vincent had assumed I'd be passive, just another recluse with a mailbox and no backbone. But I don't crumble. I document. I design. I draft patterns from chaos. They wanted a fight. What they got was a digital detonator pre-wired to blow holes in every piece of fiction they'd fabricated. And just before midnight, as I synced the final audio folder, something in me shifted. I wasn't just defending myself anymore, I was collecting ammunition. Marilyn had overplayed her hand, confident no one would challenge her HOA empire. But I'd built a full-scale evidence vault. Audio, legal, environmental, and every file was a nail in her administrative coffin. This wasn't just about protecting my land. This was about exposing how power, unchecked, turns a petty person into a tyrant. And something told me the next strike from Marilyn wouldn't be her last. But it might just be the one that snaps her mask clean in two. It started with a knock I wasn't expecting. Not the HOA kind. This one was polite, like someone asking if you wanted pie. Standing on my porch was a tall, quiet kid with wire-rimmed glasses and the look of someone who's spent more time behind screens than in the sun. "You're Grant, right?" he said. "I'm Cody Vale. I'm on the HOA tech committee. Well, was." He pulled out a flash drive like it weighed 100 pounds. "I think you need to hear what's on this." No pleasantries, no pitch, just a man who looked like he'd finally had enough of pretending. I invited him in, offered coffee. He declined. "I can't stay long." But everything's on there. Emails, board meeting recordings, bank transfers, and... well, you'll see. He paused at the door. They picked the wrong guy. Everyone's been afraid to talk, but not anymore. Then he was gone, and just like that, I had a smoking gun sitting on my desk, blinking silently in a plastic shell. I plugged it in. The folder system was clean, methodical. Someone with a mind for systems. Inside were months of email threads between Marilyn and board members. Fines discussed like sales quotas. Strategies for pushing out low-conformity households. I opened a folder labeled meetings_audio. That's where I found it. Marilyn's voice, crisp, clear, confident. The sound guy's cabin would make the perfect spa. Quiet, private, marketable. We just have to make him uncomfortable enough. She said it like she was planning a garden renovation, not a human eviction. And the worst part, no one challenged her. Just passive approval. A few mumbles, someone laughing in the background like this was a game show. It wasn't personal. It was tactical. I wasn't a neighbor. I was a business obstacle. And now I had proof. Real proof. Not just bruises of harassment, but digital fingerprints on every file. I sat back in my chair, stunned. If this was what they said in meetings, what had they done off the record? That question led me to Wayne Delaney, local legend. 73 years old, retired postal worker, backyard chicken whisperer. He lived in a one-bedroom apartment above his daughter's garage now, but before Marilyn arrived, he had a cozy little home on the edge of Pine Hollow, and a coop full of hens he called his morning choir. When I asked to speak with him, his eyes got watery before his mouth opened. Those chickens were my wife's voice after she passed, he said, voice raspy with age and something heavier. Every morning I'd sit out there with a coffee and listen. Felt like she was still with me, you know? Marilyn fined him into submission, first for odor, then for unauthorized livestock, then for improper fencing. Wayne sold the house under pressure after spending over $3,000, 0 cents fighting the violations. She said they were bringing down the look of the neighborhood, but I was there before any of them. Before her lawn signs, before the plastic smiles. I was there first. His hands trembled as he held a picture of his favorite hen, June Bug. She made me feel like garbage for loving something that didn't fit her vision. Then came Luis and Maria Vega. I met them at a diner 20 minutes out of town. One of those places where the pancakes are bigger than the plates and everyone's on a first-name basis with the coffee. Luis wore grease on his hands like jewelry. Maria had a smile that looked tired and defiant at the same time. Their crime? Working on an old Mustang in their own driveway. We'd just bought the house, Luis said. Fixing up that car was our weekend thing. Bonding. She helped sand the fender. Our son handed us tools. It wasn't a business. It was our dream. Marilyn slapped them with unauthorized mechanical activity, followed by nuisance violations, and eventually labeled their home a chronic disruptor in a board memo. They sold 6 months later at a $38,000 0 cents loss. We just couldn't take the stress anymore, Maria whispered. We'd saved for years for that house. But she made us feel like invaders. They left behind not just a car project, but a belief that home meant safety. And Marilyn shattered it with paperwork. I was angry, not just at the injustice, but at the silence it had built. These people had been buried under rules designed to look reasonable, but used like weapons. The HOA wasn't protecting a community, it was pruning one, removing anything messy, unique, human. And Marilyn wasn't just a bad leader, she was a quiet tyrant, draped in bylaws and brunch invitations. I returned home with a drive full of corruption, voices of neighbors turned refugees, and a moral obligation heavier than anything I'd felt since this started. So I did what I do best. I kept digging. If Marilyn thought she could run this like a private kingdom, I was going to draw a map of every wall she built and every crack in it. Which brings me to the Clubhouse, the gleaming gem of Pine Hollow, 2 years old, built with HOA funds, praised in newsletters, shown off to prospective buyers like it was Buckingham Palace with a pool table. I'd never cared about it, until now. I called a surveyor, a professional, neutral clipboard-carrying man who preferred facts over gossip. He spent 3 hours on my land, measuring, checking, verifying boundaries with GPS and archival maps. When he was done, he looked at me and said, You're not going to believe this. 15% of the clubhouse was on my property. North wing, 2 parking spots, and a slice of that fancy flower bed Marilyn had bragged about in her spring address. This isn't accidental, the surveyor said. Whoever approved this knew the boundary line. They built over it anyway. I stared at the building through my binoculars later that night, and something in me shifted. Marilyn had been so busy trying to get rid of me, she never stopped to check where she was standing. The irony was delicious. And, trust me, what I did with that information? That's where things get fun. The courtroom wasn't just a room. That day, it was a stage. And I'd brought my own sound check. Audio files, printed emails, property maps, digital logs, surveyor reports, and a laptop loaded with every threat, scheme, and shady HOA tactic Marilyn had ever uttered on record. No lawyer, just me. I was done paying other people to fumble what I could prove myself. When Judge Constance Mallory entered, silver hair, no-nonsense glasses, and a stare that looked like it could deprogram cult members, everything got quiet. Even Marilyn stopped adjusting her suit. I laid out my case, the way I'd mix an album, layered, sharp, no dead air. First came the fake annexation documents, then the surveillance footage, then the audio. Marilyn saying my cabin would make the perfect spa if we made him uncomfortable enough. The judge didn't flinch, but I saw her eyebrow rise like a volume knob slowly turning up. Vincent Frawley objected midway through, stammering about consent and admissibility. The man had the legal firepower of a hot glue gun in a thunderstorm. "Objection, Your Honor. Those recordings." Judge Mallory cut him off like a conductor snapping a baton. "Counselor, are you disputing that your client said these things?" Vincent looked at Marilyn. Marilyn looked at the floor. "Because," the judge continued, "unless you are claiming these tapes are fabricated, we're moving forward." And we did, right into the financial documents. Cody's flash drive was gold. I showed evidence of HOA dues being funneled into personal Venmo accounts labeled Community Outreach. I showed the $25,000 0-cents grant for rural improvements filed using my address, and the itemized spending that included catered lunches, patio heaters, and a massage chair for the clubhouse break room. The mood shifted from neighborly squabble to federal felony real fast. And as Marilyn's blush crawled up her neck, I realized the one sound missing was her voice. Then came the surveyor's report. I dropped it on the record like a cymbal crash. 15% of the HOA clubhouse sits illegally on my land, I told the court. They knew it. They built anyway. Here's the boundary documentation, time-stamped and filed. The judge scanned the report like she was reading a bad novel she didn't have time to finish. "This structure will be removed," she said, "within 90 days, or the HOA will face contempt charges." Marilyn gasped audibly. Vincent blinked like someone had unplugged his brain. I wasn't just winning. I was dragging their whole sandcastle of threats into the tide. And then, icing on the cake, the judge issued immediate restraining orders for both of them. "You will not contact Mr. Telford, not by phone, mail, email, or proxy," she said. "And this court is forwarding all financial documentation to the U.S. Attorney's Office for federal review." I didn't smile, I just nodded. But inside, I was playing a whole gospel choir on loop. The clubhouse demolition began quietly. Until it wasn't. The crew brought in jackhammers and legal tape, and on the second day, while removing the floor of the north wing, the part that sat on my land, they found it. A floor safe. Old, rusted, buried beneath the laminate. The city sent out an officer, cracked it open, and what came out changed the game. $42,000 0 cents in cash, a ledger with HOA member names and donation amounts, and an envelope full of handwritten notes outlining fraudulent grant applications. It was like the finale of a true crime documentary, except I was in it, and the villain was wearing blush and pearls on court day. Marilyn tried to play it off like she had no idea. "Must have been from the last board president," she stammered. But the ink was fresh, the handwriting matched notes we'd already submitted, and suddenly this was no longer HOA misconduct. It was criminal enterprise with a return address. Now here's the twist. Marilyn didn't go quiet. No apology, no retreat. Instead, she went full PR damage control. 3 days after the hearing, she showed up on Channel 6 News in Granville, makeup caked, voice quivering just enough to sound fragile, claimed she was the victim of a tech-savvy hermit with a grudge. Said I'd hacked HOA files, manipulated footage, and coordinated a smear campaign because I didn't want to follow the rules. The story should have flopped. But the internet? It doesn't let lies rest easy anymore. By noon, every piece of audio I'd submitted to the court was online, uploaded by neighbors, journalists, maybe even Cody himself. Her TV appearance backfired harder than a rusted-out lawnmower. By nightfall, a national outlet picked up the story under the headline, "Heroin Musician After Harassing Musician," and that was before the FBI even knocked on her door. It didn't take long. Once the news broke, Marilyn's fake grants, the Clubhouse cash stash, the voice recordings, the FBI showed up like the credits on a bad movie. Clean suits, clean warrants. They raided Marilyn's home first. Neighbors said she tried to act surprised, like a woman caught with her hand in the HOA till, but still clutching a pastry tray. Vincent Frawley was next. His office emptied in under an hour. The man who once puffed his chest and quoted civil code was suddenly very quiet, suddenly very cooperative. I didn't celebrate. Not exactly. I just watched the house lights come back on across the neighborhood, like someone had flipped a switch from fear to daylight. People started talking again, not whispering, not texting, talking. And for the first time in years, the silence wasn't oppressive. It was voluntary, it was peace. The HOA was dissolved by court order 2 weeks later. Turns out, when the treasurer is cooking the books and the president's building on stolen land, your charter gets revoked faster than you can say mandatory dues. A public vote made it official. No more board meetings, no more fines for tomatoes or chalk drawings, no more passive-aggressive newsletters signed with Community Love MD. The same community center that once sat empty reopened with a potluck. Kids brought cookies, elders brought folding chairs. Someone made a sign that said, "Welcome back to Pine Hollow," unmuted. For the first time, the place felt like it belonged to the people who lived in it, and I realized something simple and strange. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, but when it whispers with receipts, even tyrants take notice. Took a walk to the end of my land, stopped where the clubhouse used to cast its unearned shadow and just stood there. It was quiet but not lonely. I thought about what Marilyn tried to do, bully me off my land, erase my home, mute me into submission. And what actually happened? She tried to make me homeless. Instead, she made me a homeowner of justice. Every foot of soil beneath my boots had been defended with truth, patience, and the kind of detail only an audio engineer could love. But it wasn't just about me anymore. This fight unearthed something bigger. There were people like Ellen, Cody, Wayne, the Vegas, people who'd been bruised by a system that was supposed to keep order, not impose tyranny in khakis. And I had more than evidence now. I had clarity. I had purpose. So I donated half the land, 50% of the acres my grandfather left me, to the Pine Hollow Conservation Trust. It's protected now, forever. No bulldozers, no resorts, no spa development opportunity. Just water, trees, and silence that doesn't answer to power. The cabin, I kept that. A man needs a place to think. And from that little wooden studio, we built something new. The Community Defense Network. Started with 5 of us. Me, Ellen, Cody, Wayne, and the Vegas. We pooled our talents, tech, testimony, legal know-how, stories that cut deeper than spreadsheets ever could. Within 3 months, we were helping other neighborhoods document HAO harassment, challenge fraudulent fines, and hold abusers accountable. Turns out, people don't need heroes, they just need proof, and someone to show them where to aim it. Wayne came out of retirement to host workshops for seniors on property rights. Ellen organized monthly town halls with laughter and zero agendas. Luis and Maria used their car restoration business to help families whose HOA violations had drained their funds. And Cody? He became our digital guardian angel, scrubbing metadata, locking down archives, and smiling in a way I hadn't seen the day he handed me that flash drive. We were no longer survivors. We were stewards, and as we grew, people from other states reached out. Arkansas, Texas, Arizona. They all had the same story in different packaging. Power run wild behind a smile and a rule book, and now they had a place to turn. That was the victory, not the court order, not the demolition, but the voice that replaced silence. Now, I sit on my porch, coffee in hand, listening to the loons call across the water, not threats. The lake reflects a sky that doesn't have a ceiling anymore. There's still mail in my box, sure, but it's postcards from families who stayed. Thank you notes from a veteran in Tennessee. A hand-drawn picture from a girl in Ohio who finally got to draw rainbows on her sidewalk without her parents getting fined. Sometimes I think about Marilyn, about how she tried to erase one home and ended up exposing a system that hurt dozens. She wanted a quiet neighborhood. What she got was a louder truth. And here's the final note, the last line in the song she accidentally helped write. When the bully loses her clipboard, the neighborhood finds its voice. And as I sit here on this quiet porch, with the hum of cicadas and the slow rhythm of the lake breathing in the background, I realize something. Peace isn't the absence of noise, it's the presence of purpose. Marilyn tried to tear my life apart with fines and false authority, but all she really did was teach me how to rebuild something stronger, something real, something that can't be bulldozed, bought, or bullied, and that's the lesson I leave you with. You don't need a title to stand for what's right. You don't need a board position to defend your home. You just need clarity, courage, and a record button. When power overreaches, it doesn't matter how polite it sounds. It's still wrong. And when good people stay quiet, bad rules win. But when one person dares to say, "Not here, not this time," that silence breaks. That's when change begins. This story isn't just about a cabin, a clubhouse, or some chickens. It's about how easily abuse hides behind rules, how systems built to help us can be hijacked to hurt us, and how people, when they come together, can reclaim what was always theirs: dignity, voice, and the right to live without fear on the land they love. So if this story struck a chord, if it made you laugh, think, or feel just a little braver, go ahead and hit that like button. Drop a comment below and tell us what your HOA moment has been, or how you found peace with purpose. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow's story, it's just as wild, just as true, and it might just remind you that justice has a funny way of knocking, especially when you least expect it. Thanks for listening. Stay sharp, stay kind, and don't forget, silence is golden until it's weaponized. Then it's time to make some noise.